I read in your bio you wrote midwifery and herbs called to me by name so loudly I couldn't ignore them. So of course this resonates with me and the Herb Rally audience very much so. I was just kind of hoping you could tell us about how those herbs called you so loudly.
I really just can't even kind of put words to it. It was just a feeling. It was an experience. It was I think, a gestalt of all the things that I've shared with you, right? Like
Yeah.
this sense of disenfranchisement from the, the direction the world was going in for me at that time. Um, really seeing this arms escalation and this
Hmm.
sense of like, we have to know how to take care of ourselves. Um, a really deep disenchantment with I wouldn't say disenchantment, a deep aversion to the growing understanding I had as a teenager of the interconnectedness between the pharmaceutical industry, the military industry, and the agricultural industry, and wanting another way. And at that time, I started meeting these incredible young people, Marcial being one of them. There were a few other women. There was this woman named Meredith, who I remember at Simon's Rock. She was a few years older, and she said, "Try this." And she handed me a piece of dulse seaweed to
Hmm.
just taste and see what it was like. Another woman named Polly Herman, who took me to my first herb farm. And I think it was called Seven Arrows. I don't think it's here anymore. I've never been able to find it. So unless it's gone, just like back to family, and I don't know. But we went there and they were growing lavender and mint, and they had little bags of, different mixes. And I was just like, this is it. This is who I am, and this is what I want to do. The midwifery piece, for me, was an interesting piece. So there's a psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof, who was actually the earliest modern LSD psychotherapist, LSD researcher and a psychotherapist. He's Czechoslovakian. He has a very long and interesting history, but back in the 1950s, he started using LSD psychotherapy in patients and started documenting what he called rebirthing experiences. And he wrote a paper that got handed to me when I was 15 called The Perinatal Roots of War. And he looks at, some of it's facile, but very interesting. Like there's a lot more complexity to why people have trauma than just how they're born. But a big thesis that he had is that if we're born in trauma, we often will spend our lives recapitulating what's familiar, those feelings of trauma. If we're born medicated, we will often recapitulate our lives seeking that sort of origin feeling that we had. And, there's some truth to that, although I think he simplified it. Not everybody who's had a birth by cesarean with anesthesia ends up becoming addicted to something. And certainly people can have difficult births and grow up and be wonderful, peaceful, joyous people. But for me at 15, I was like, okay, if there is a connection to war and violence and trauma and how we're born, I want to do something about that. And so, I mean, I was literally actually in one hand handed the paper and in another hand handed spiritual midwifery and went, okay, this is it.
Hmm.
That's kind of how it happened. And I mean, I do have experiences where I have had plants come to me in dreams and say, okay, when you go to this birth, make sure to have this on hand. Or I have had plants where I've had deeply, powerfully induced dreams, not psychedelics, just, yarrow or um, um, birthwort or different things that have, appeared to me. And when I'm out, it's funny. I was listening to NPR. Michael Pollan was being
Hmm.
interviewed by Terry Gross, and he said, "Before I did psychedelics, I used to know that plants could communicate." But he said, "But Terry, now when I'm in my garden, I actually hear them talking to me." And I don't use psychedelics anymore. I
Sure.
think for me,
Yeah.
it's not a great fit for my nervous system. That is something I left back behind when I was 16
Sure.
in terms of my personal use. But I can't help but think that once we expose ourselves to that wider perception or wider lens of, let's say, the porousness of separation,
Hmm.
I don't think we're all separated. And I think once we open ourselves to certain ways of experiencing the interconnectedness of the world around us, plants become part of those communicators.
Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.